consider her a sister. We met at Standing Rock, actually, and we're both in the medic healer camp, and she was doing mental health, or just holding space there for people, and all the challenges that were coming up for people there. And that's where we met, and we've stayed in touch ever since. And just these topics are both very close to our hearts. So Lisa's been has had a really amazing journey around healing and around mental health, because she was she taught at the University of was it New Mexico State University, I think, and she taught there, and she was teaching in the psychology department for counseling, and she put together a whole program on Indigenous ways of knowing for that department, and she's going to share a little bit about that tonight. And she's also a member of the Washoe tribe in Nevada, Carson City. She lives in Carson City, and she'll share a little bit about that to open up. And I think, Lisa, should we do just a little bit of a grounding first, or would you like to do that after you introduce yourself, or do you want to do the grounding yourself?
Grounding sounds good.
I got a little stage here. Okay, all right. So yeah, just starting off, we like to start off all our connection cafes with a little moment of just getting present with each other and with the topic. So just invite everybody to go ahead and just settle in and take a moment and feel where their breath is. Just take a moment and feel the ground beneath you. Feeling breath going deeper into your belly, into your body, and just settling your whole body. Feeling that earth holding you. Yeah. And Lisa, would you like to share your Washoe introduction?
Washoe Demomo ke letle kashanadi digum dia Dr. Lisa Graysheild. Washishu ahui ditehuya et stotolia ngangangowe wisha hutuwe we Egypt gabagi watli wapi medua watli wapi medua. I'm a Washoe from northern Nevada, and we're all Washoe, and all of us are people of the land, and that's what our name means. It refers to the people of the land. And so it didn't distinguish at one point, and I think when we get down to the heart and core of it, it doesn't distinguish today either. So I just said that we're all standing together here on this land together, strong, and we're working together to make a future for our future generations. So and it's good to be here. It's good to, I always welcome an opportunity and an honor to be asked to speak or to talk about something that I really care about. So hopefully, we get to interact a little bit. It's nice to see there's 22 people on. Wow, that's quite a group. So I'm really incredibly grateful that there's this many people who would want to listen, to some old professor talk about Indigenous ways of knowing. So Jewel, I'm just going to do an introduction, and then I'm going to check in with you and see where we're at. But I I grew up on the Washoe Indian Reservation in Carson City, Nevada. I've also raised my daughter on this reservation. Their father is Eastern Band Cherokee. And I went to college at an Indian college in Muskogee, Oklahoma, called Bacone College, that educated Native students coming out of high school, regardless of what our GPA was. And from there, I went to UNR and got a teaching degree. And I taught elementary school in my area near my reservation. So that was quite an honor. I taught for 3 years. And then I went back to school and got my master's in counseling psychology or counseling. And I ran some programs for the Washoe County School District. And I was an Indian education consultant for the state of Nevada. And then, and as I continued on in my education and got my PhD in counseling and educational psychology, I was also raising 3 daughters, so my personal life was also rolling on, and my daughters are now grown, and I'm a grandmother of 5 beautiful grandchildren. I have, my oldest grandson is 9, and I spent 15 years as a professor at the university, and primarily, in counseling and educational psychology. And my focus was Indigenous ways of knowing as a practical paradigm for understanding mental health and how to approach wellness. So that's just a little bit brief about me. So I'll just check in with see how we doing, Jewel?
Great, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, so the topic is decolonize mental health. And so maybe to begin with, Lisa, a little bit about, I think we all know what mental health is, but what is, maybe not everybody has the same understanding about what it means to decolonize mental health. Yeah. So maybe you could share about that.
I think probably that's absolutely the first question in addressing, what does it mean to be well? What is mental health? From the Western paradigm, we get all kinds of definitions and theories about what mental health is. And we follow a line of theoretical precepts that talk about humanistic, social, cognitive, behavioral, and we have all of these definitions of what health is and how we function within certain parameters in order to be considered normal. So in the Western paradigm, mental health really equates to our ability to be able to function in the world, right, as ourselves, as we move through our daily lives. From an Indigenous paradigm, being well means that we are connected, body, mind, soul, and spirit. And when we look at ourselves collectively, we can see that there's a large disconnect within quite a number of populations of the world where a lot of oppressive circumstances have caused havoc and wreaked havoc on our communities and our people. And it continues to happen all over the world today. So we see the colonization of groups and things changing. So we're always at some kind of a level of colonizing or decolonizing or trying to understand these kinds of things. So from an Indigenous perspective, being well means to know yourself and to be in balance in your physical body, your cognitive mind, the way that we think, that we're able to think positively, because thoughts are creations and words are prayers. And that's also at the heart of an Indigenous thought process, is if we're thinking about something, that's why it's happening around us. We're creating these things. And if we are talking about it, my auntie told me that our thoughts are creations and our words are prayers. So this is maybe a Washoe concept, but I think of it as an Indigenous concept too, because a lot of our original seed languages, including Sanskrit, were languages that were very positive and they were very connected to the earth and to the sounds and to the ground. So they're the original languages. So when we look at ancient languages, so there it's a construct of being present. So do I have everybody here before I get off? So, and I can only see some of you. So if I try to scroll through so I can see who else is on with me, it's kind of nice just to say hello. So what does it mean in mental health to be well? It means to be connected to ourselves from a physical aspect, from a mental aspect, being mentally well. with a psychology Western paradigm, that our mind is functioning, that our soul and our spirit is healed from ailments or from disconnect from spirit, and that we do have our spiritual practices intact. And so all of those things, you know, we think about that medicine wheel, the 4 directions: body, mind, soul, and spirit. You know, when I was teaching in my counseling program, we created an Indigenous counseling minor degree program so that our doctoral students could experience what it was like. Because as a professor, I began to see, and as a Native American and as a Native person raised in my community, I could see that there was a difference in our understanding of what it means to be well in the world. And the way that I was being taught as a psychologist and actually as an educator of psychology and in the helping professions, what I was being taught and what I had experienced in my community were very different. And the disconnect came in that the paradigm that education comes from is a Western paradigm, which is consumerism. And so, you know, we go to school and we begin to learn how to be citizens, how to be consumers, and these kinds of things. But there is no mention really, other than maybe in some biology class, of being connected to the earth and being connected to plants and being connected to the sun. You know, I've walked into classrooms and asked the students, which way are the directions? They don't know where north, south, east, and west is. You know, but we do have to know these things when we live close to nature. We need to know when the sun comes up and when the sun is going down. And we need to, you know, understand the seasonal cycles, because we need to know when to collect food and when to get firewood and when, you know, when the trees are going to be full of pine nuts. And we need to have all those kinds of knowledges. So being connected to the earth is critical. And then to disconnect from the earth and actually participate in the destruction of it was a dichotomy in Indigenous thinking and in mental wellness. So in my mind, there was no wonder why Native people and Indigenous people all over the globe suffered at a higher rate than Western-minded people, because they did not have that same value structure. You know, I remember as a counselor going to school and teachers saying, these Indian kids and their parents, they just don't care. And I'm like, what do you mean they don't care? I'm an Indian parent. I care. I want my daughters to do well in school. Yes, I care. I don't think that's a good statement. It's just, that's not all there is. We don't care to the point that they're going to miss Auntie's funeral. Or we don't care to the point that when our young girl starts her moon, that we're going to pull her out of school so that she can go through the proper training on what it means to be a woman. So the value structure was different. It wasn't about not caring. It was about not putting the weight of value on each one of these things. And I began to understand this. And as I became a professor and a teacher of mental health and mental wellness, I also had to rethink the way that, you know, I had to decolonize the way that I was taught in the schools to actually help people to be well. Because, and then then we needed to identify, and now not just, you know, myself, but a number of Indigenous and Native writers and authors and colleagues of mine whom I still work with and I still write with. In fact, we finished a book that I'll tell you all about too, hopefully before this ends. But what we talked about is how important those Native Indigenous constructs are in our ability to really make a change and be a change in a very polarized world that we live in today. What does that mean? You know, in my mind and my understanding and the understanding of what I see Indigenous people all over the world today speaking out as they're holding up their signs for their lands that are being bulldozed, or they're trying to stand up to keep the telescopes from you know, being erected up on Mauna Kea, or they're trying to stop the pipes from going underneath the water, that black snake from making its way all the way through the earth. You know, what I see them telling us is that we care. And when I looked down when I went to Standing Rock, I saw more non-Native than Native people. And what I realized too is we're all Native, we're all Indigenous. Every single one of us is Indigenous. It doesn't matter what our skin color is, whether we came from Europe or Spain or France, we're all Indigenous. And that indigeneity, it's important for us to get in touch with that indigeneity, because that uniqueness is what makes the world so wonderful. And it's what makes the world such a beautiful place to be, because there's no competition. You know, we're bred up in a world where we have to compete for position. And in an indigenous way of the world, you don't have to compete for position. You're all important. Every single person, every single age group. It's all, you know, it's all, and it's all very relative. But when we understand that nobody has my gifts and I don't have anybody else's gifts, I don't have to compete with you for what that is all about. You know, I simply have to spend my life in a journey that allows me to have self-discovery. So I came up with a definition, I meaning my students and myself throughout these programs that we created, and a number of other Native and Indigenous professors who've been writing on these things. But so to be well from an Indigenous perspective has two qualities. That's interdependence and interrelationship. Or interdependent, self-determination and interdependence. You know, so we want to be self-determined in our interdependence. I don't know if that makes sense, but to be standing in the center. So where we have 4 constructs that talk about what it means to be well from a medicine wheel point of view, body, mind, soul, and spirit. All those 4 dimensions that we want to balance. There are 3 constructs that will allow us to determine for ourselves if we're well and healthy. What are those gauges? So the indicators of being well, while the domains are body, mind, soul, and spirit, the indicators are above, below, and all around. All around meaning me. I'm the only one that can really say whether or not I'm well. And I'm really also the only one who can truly heal myself. When I depend on Western medicine, I get side effects. When I depend on Western food structures, I get disease. When I depend on getting a job out in the world and trying to keep up with the Jones, I get stressed, you know, mental wellness. So, you know, in order to really take myself out of these constructs, I have to take full responsibility for myself, body, mind, soul, and spirit. I take responsibility for what I put in my mouth. I take responsibility for the perceptual experience I have when I leave an experience. Am I going to say negative things about that experience, or am I going to say positive things about that experience? Am I going to learn from that experience, or am I going to continue a cycle of destruction that tends to go on when we nitpick, when we really don't pay attention to the intention of our communication? And so from an Indigenous perspective, it's important for us to be self-determined, self-motivated, aware, grounded, and to take responsibility for really finding what that gift is, that what it is that we have to offer the world. That's called cultural propriety. The responsibility that we have as a community is to step into that community and be have a positive impact on it. So it's not about individualism, it's about collectivism for sure. And we know today more than, you know, I know I'm preaching to the choir because Julia asked me to come on here, and I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say we all know that we're all in this together. And in that knowing, we still, each and every one of us, have a point of juxtation where we can grow or we cannot grow. And it all centers around those 4 constructs of our body. What can we change on a daily basis in order to be healthy and to be well? Our mind, what is our thought process doing all the time? Are we talking outlifting? I mean, really, if I believed that all my words were prayers, wouldn't I only want to speak positive? Absolutely. Now, that doesn't mean we can't open up a space to talk about the things that we need to talk about and to release and to have, that's what ceremony is all about, to allow those things to release. Because when we step out of ceremony, we walk into everyday life, now we're present. And this is when it really counts. You know, this is when this is when we can be ourselves. So I'm going to stop and kind of check in with everybody and see where you're at before I get too far. Maybe I can even get some feedback on something that I'm saying that makes sense or doesn't make sense. So yeah.
Lisa, would you please explain the difference between soul and spirit?
Okay, Beverly, yes. Soul and spirit. Okay, so the soul that's the energetic structures that make up the uniqueness of who I am as a being. That's the energy that lives right around my body. It's me, it's my physical, the soul. And we get what we call a soul wound, when we get hurt as a child, or we carry something intergenerational. There's a soul in that energetic structure that makes it me. Spirit, that's the collective. Okay. That's everything. That's God. That's, the universal consciousness, the great spirit, that's spirit. Now, and I try really hard not to define what that means, because I have the utmost respect for for the origins of just about every religion that I know of. I think we all have an important role culturally and spiritually in how we learned, when those things are not oppressing others, which oftentimes we get those lines blurred. But I do have a respect for everybody's form of spirituality, so I would never try to define that. But collectively, I don't see spirituality necessarily as religion or as a flavor. I see it as the interconnectedness of all beingness.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Lisa. And I'll just if you want to ask Lisa a question, just go ahead and either raise your hand if you are on video, or you can do the raise hand function if you're not on video, on the sidebar. There's a raise hand function. So, and I'll call, or Lisa will call on somebody. So, Shakhtari, yeah.
Thanks. I couldn't see whether it went up or not. There it is. Thank you for all of that. I was trying to take notes when you were talking so quickly, so I just wanted to go back and ask a few things, if you don't mind. One of the things that you said was that our indicators are above, below, and then I couldn't catch the rest of that.
So the indicators of being well, would be our knowledge of our ancestors, what I would call is a washo demilo sangumtanu, that's above. Those are my relatives from the stars. We see ourselves as star people, and we see that many cultures have their origin stories that come from the stars, and that's where our origin stories. So we're star people. So demilo sangumtanu, that would be the way that we see ourselves, above. And then below would be our connection to the earth, to Mother Earth. What is our relationship with the earth? Do we have a relationship with the earth? Do we walk barefoot? We know from science that when we walk barefoot on the ground, not only is there an energetic release into our bodies, but it also mineralizes us, because being barefoot on dirt, we get those minerals into our body as well. So our groundedness, our sense of feeling present, so above, below, and then all around is, that's ourselves, my heart, where I'm at, generally, if I say, how you doing? I like, so it's my sense of me. Wakalet is in Washo, I would say Wakalet. Wakalet means this is me. I'm not more, I'm not less. This is who I am, Wakalet. Wakalet. So does that make sense? So the 4 indicators of being well are in the body, the mind, the soul, and the spirit. Those are the domains that we could actually focus on. If I were to make a workbook, I would break it up in those 4 areas, and you would write the things going on in each one of those areas. I used to teach in my human development class in the 4 directions, and assign books for each one of those directions. For the body, I would assign healing with whole foods. And I really wanted my students to have a well-rounded view of, what that physical aspect and what they carry through their lineages and all of those things through dietary and that kind of thing. And then for the mind, I would assign power versus force. Oh no, I would assign not power versus force. I would assign, it was it'll come to me. A mind sight. It was mind sight. So really, it's about the neuroscience of the way that our brain actually functions too, in some ways in connection to our heart and our emotions and who we are as a being. How all of that works together. And then for the soul, I would assign power versus force, because I wanted people to understand that we have an energetic structure that, you know, and our emotions are so critical in our ability to gauge how we are living our lives and how we are feeling. You know, when we're depressed, our energies are really low, and we're really happy, our energies are really up there. And so to give us an understanding that we function in different areas and we have different realizations about life, you know, so that's another whole topic.
And spirit?
Well, and spirit, I often left that open, you know, to let people choose something that they wanted to write about when it came to spirit and interconnectedness, because that when it comes to spirit, it's all you. There's nothing I can, you know, when we clear the soul wounds that prevent us from being spiritual people, or those disconnects, or when we clear those things up and we step into that, then, you know, we develop our own sense of spirituality, whether it be through a church or something else. We still can develop our own sense of what it means to be spiritual.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Janet?
Janet has her hand up. Lisa.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much. It's nice to meet you. After you were talking about that above, below, and all around, then you started speaking about cultural proprietary. I think that was the term. And I didn't really catch that. If you wouldn't mind talking a little bit more about that, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. You guys, you're paying attention because thank you so much. I know I probably spilled out a ton of information because of my years of having to pack it in there, but cultural propriety. So cultural propriety, I would say, if there is a goal in an Indigenous ways of knowing theoretical paradigm to understanding being well, it would be cultural propriety. And what cultural propriety is, it's our ability to, it's our place within the culture. It's that search, you know, it's kind of it's that search of how is it that I contribute to this community, you know, in what is my impact? And your impact, you know, we want our impact to always be in a good way. And so cultural propriety is our goal in life, that we would find that impact. Now, I compare that a lot of times with, is anybody familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Maslow has this pyramid, right? And you get your basic needs met, and then you can do all of these things, and then you can reach enlightenment. Maslow actually got his information from his work with Blackfeet children on the Blackfeet reservation, and he was observing how they played with each other and observing the culture. And what he found is that Maslow took this shape, and from his observations, he could see that these kids, you know, were behaving in certain ways. And so he made this theoretical paradigm. But what he didn't say, he said that our goal was enlightenment. And the goal is not enlightenment from an Indigenous perspective. And the pyramid that Maslow wrote is not a pyramid, it's a teepee. He took it from the teepee. And at the top of the teepee, when you look down from the center is enlightenment. But when you look down, it goes all the way to the bottom, and we come in and it continues out to the top. So that shape, that dimensional shape that goes down, we come into the world with the assumption of being enlightened because we're spiritual beings. So our babies, they're spiritual beings, those little babies. They're so complex, they don't even need language. All they have to do is cry and we'll run to them. Because, you know, their connection is, they're just really trying to figure out this physical one.
Right.
And that's where the brain development, and that's where Western science comes in. Oh, okay, now we can see the brain moving and the brain development. Before, it's all milky white, and they think that babies don't really have any thoughts. Babies are so interconnected, they don't friggin' need thoughts. They're present, you know. And that's, you know, as human, you know, and then we lose that sense of presence because we get socialized. So cultural propriety is not, we're not searching to be enlightened or to be above anybody else. We're searching to be a part and a member of a community in a positive way.
Sure.
Enlightenment is assumed. It's, I mean, we're already, you know, we come in as enlightened beings. We just have to remember that. That's why we have ceremony, to remember that.
So basically it's an awareness of my impact in the world, like being aware of my impact in the world.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you.
Any more questions for Lisa or?
I have a question. I really resonate with the Indigenous way of defining well-being. And I'm wondering, you were speaking a little bit about what kind of the conflict in a sense or dissonance that would sort of arise when you would come up against the existing sort of Western paradigm of education. And I'm wondering, what your thoughts are on how we might be able to work with the existing paradigm to introduce more Indigenous ways of knowing and being as part of that paradigm. If there's like a compassionate way to start doing that, and some of the obstacles that you've come up against with that, and yes, just any experience or wisdom you have around that. Thank you.
Well, I feel incredibly hopeful because I think there is definitely something bigger than ourselves here, and that we are at this time period that we call seventh generation. Even though we're all seventh generation at some point, 7 before and 7 after, but right now there's a lot of things, streams of knowledge coming together. The planets are lining up. We're having all of these environmental and social and economic things going on in our country. Things are breaking down, things are changing, shifting. We have this pandemic happening. We're at a time where we're at that juxtaposition point of change. When I say, find out where you're at and make the choices that you need to make in order to expand and to be present and to be fully engaged and to be yourself and to have a beautiful life experience here, I'm hopeful because I feel that this 7th generation, that we have enough information that has culminated to the point of we're either going to continue down that cycle of destruction or we're going to say enough. And I think that we're all saying enough. That's what I see, that we're all saying enough. And as we each one of us steps into our own highest expression, we'll be guided we don't have to be convinced, and we don't have to convince anybody else. But we'll be guided and we'll take that step, and you'll know in every moment, that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I think that the journey is no longer, it is out there. Activism is critical. In fact, it's one of the key points that I make of evidence that we're living a healthful life, is that we're involved in some level of activism. But really the journey is inward. It's an inward journey, because if we can change the way that we see the world, right, we can change the world. We can, if we change the way we perceive things, we can begin to bring that perception, because it's a positive prayer, into existence and into manifestation. So, gosh, I think there's a lot we can do, and a lot everybody is already doing. We could make a huge list, and the big thing is stay positive, really maintain that high vibration, do your inner work. Do the work that it takes, and do the affirmations, the prayers, the mantras, the yoga class, or or running, or whatever it is that we do to stay healthy. Do those things and do them well. And, that alone, it will release. It's already releasing. So, we're called in so many different ways. And, I'm really grateful to know that, taking care of my grandchildren and my parents is a huge thing. It's not a small thing. It's not a drudgery. I am so grateful to get to take care of my grandparents. I am so grateful to get to play with my grandchildren. Really enjoying those simple things and de-stressing ourselves. That's so critical, to de-stress. We don't want to add to the chaotic energy that's out there. We want to, hold space, learn how to hold space so that it's not impacting us, and that that our stuff that we're working with is not impacting somebody else. That's a lot. That's a whole lot to do. So, and I think that's actually, when we do that, we're not just thinking of ourselves, we're thinking of the collective vibration, if you will, that we want to be a part of, that we want to create something beautiful, positive, in a good way. I don't know if I answered your question at all.
So yeah, that beautifully articulated and very reassuring. 'Cause, it aligns with the approach that we've been taking here at the Inner Resilience Network, and kind of, it starts with us and kind of the ripple effect that we create in the communities around us. So yeah, I really, really appreciate that. And I believe Renee has a hand up.
Thank you very much. Your words and your teacher presence and bringing what you know with your students is wonderful. I'm wanting to ask you or talk about the current teacher we have of COVID, who's been a hard teacher for many, and I acknowledge the privilege we all have of still being here. But the teaching of what were the words you just used? I've lost it. But of ceremony that has to now be so each on our own. It seems many of us are having to learn a different way of ceremony when we can't be together for a ceremony. And I wondered if you had thoughts or anything to offer us on that.
Well, ceremony is a time, when we get to come together, all these things that we've been holding off and release and do those things, but really all of life is ceremony. And I think sometimes if, it's like, I look around my little place here and, I think, this is my little temple where I live in my little tiny house, and, I have my altar up, and, all of life is ceremony. And I think sometimes, even though we need each other, and, it's good to have forums like this, but ceremony is when we wake up in the morning and when we recognize that sun is right there, the sun is there, and go stand in that sun. And we know that vitamin D is coming in us, that it's light, that we are light energy, and, just, like that's ceremony. And, when we take our first drink of water, and especially if we know where that water comes from, that spring water, and we talk to our water, thank you, water, earth, fire, water, and air. These are the basic elementals, and it's like, and, we light our candle and we sit with our fire at night and stare into that fire and shut down the busyness of everything else and have ceremony with that fire. Ceremony is just critical. For me, it's my lifeline, without ceremony, and I love ceremony. I love sweat lodges. I love, our Native American church ceremonies that we do. I'm involved in a number of plant ceremony and things with my family. And it's been like, I love ceremony, but since these times have started, we have really backed off of all of that. And it's been, and I feel probably like all of you, like, oh, where's my ceremony? I want it, but I am reminded that what's important about ceremony is what happens after and before ceremony. And so, it's like for us to create our ceremonial ways to, I say what the beautiful thing about Indigenous ceremonies all over the world is they include the earth, fire, water, and air. If you're crawling into a sweat lodge, you're on the ground. The fire is heating those rocks. You're bringing those rocks into the lodge, pouring that hot water, making that steam that comes up and touches all of us. And so, it's like, yeah. So ceremony is like, just bring in the earth, the fire, the water, the air, and breathe, do the breath work. I'm sure a lot of you have breathing practices. Those breathing practices are critical. Not only are they scientifically sound for creating mental wellness and physical wellness, they are ceremonial practices in recognizing, that our life breath, and water, drinking that water, when I drink that water first thing in the morning, and say, oh my, I get to go get it from the spring that's up in Da'oaga at Lake Tahoe. I get that water and I sit down with that water and I'm like, I got Tahoe water, dot water. This water is the water of my people. And I drink that water and it's ceremony. So, you know, I miss ceremony too, but life is ceremony. And I do get reminded that every day is ceremony. So in every moment, you know, is ceremony. I would love for it to be that way because, you know, but, you know, I also don't mind the isolation, you know, because we all have our different personality types and our different gifts and things. So we are working with things in different ways, you know, and for me, the isolation's been wonderful. But that's not for everybody. I realize that. So yeah, I don't know if I answered that question, but ceremony is definitely important and we have to find those ceremony changes too, like everything else. It changes.
Monty?
Oh, sorry, Lisa. But, there's Monty has a question.
Thanks, Jewel and Shanti. Lisa, thank you so much for this really extraordinary time that you share. I am just so touched. So thank you. And I wonder if it would be interesting or you feel appropriate to talk a bit about specifically racism in America and white supremacy. And, you know, I don't, I'm asking the question because I'm involved in some anti-racist activities in my hometown. And I don't know that we have a sense of what we're doing. So I would just so appreciate anything you'd like to say about that.
Well, first of all, Monty, I want to say thank you for being involved. You know, that you know, and when I look at it, you know, from this whole paradigm, just being involved at any level is a part of saying, hey, I'm a healthy being because I can speak up for my community or for the things that you believe in. So I just want to say thank you for that. And yeah, it's a tough one. You know, we're in this time of Aquarius and enlightenment and all this 7th generation of beautiful things where I just want to stay. And then we see white supremacy and we see challenges happening on our political structures and all these things happening all over the world and in other countries and, you know, and these things going on. And it's like, wow, it's kind of crazy to see that, you know, that we've gotten to this place, but it all feels incredibly polarizing. And I wish I did have an answer. I wish I could say something about that. The one thing I can say is that not only our involvement is a prayer. It's a prayer in that direction. And that it is still absolutely critical for us to take care of ourselves and know and understand that our presence and our care and our prayers, you know, are just our prayers, however it is we say those prayers in those directions and remembering those things, those are important too. And those do make a difference, you know, but we're polarized. It's hard to, if I try to get into what happened, you know, in this political structure, listening to my mom and dad talk about everybody converging on the White House and now this going on and it broke my heart, you know, just like everybody else's when the racism really riled up this past year. And, you know, it was really challenging to see these things happen. And as strong as we are, there's going to be a resolve that's at that other end that's always pulling. And if we can step ourselves out of it from a personal level at times to give ourselves the opportunity to recognize that we are making a difference. You know, we can see that those things will begin to diminish, but they are going to hype up. We don't have control of everybody else. These energies do exist on this planet, unfortunately. And we at times can get drug in there if we have some kind of a thread that allows us to get pulled in that direction, or we can learn to be a space holder and step into those situations like I did at Standing Rock. I didn't necessarily go there to stand up with a sign and say, get that pipeline out from underneath. I went there because I believed in the heart of the cause, you know, in the heart of we care about Mother Earth. I was like, I'm sign me up for that one. You know, it's like, I don't have an intention to stand on the front line, but there's all these people around that are saying, I love the earth. The water that we drink is important. And they're coming from all over the world. And, you know, I was really humbled, but you know, we don't have any answers. And the things that we saw that went on in Standing Rock, I could have been in a war zone camp, and I didn't realize that it had gotten so intense at times that, you know, there was like war tactics, infiltration, all kinds of wonky things kind of that went on right there in North Dakota, you know, in this camp that we're in. And what I realized is I didn't get worn down and drawn in because I had learned how to hold space, which is hard. I come home and then maybe I don't hold space so well once I get home, and all my family's, you know, and I got to figure out how to hold space there. But I do, and I do learn how to hold space, you know, and I think that's a lot of what we're doing. We're called to a cause, and we can assist with holding space, you know, in a good way. You know, it comes down to understanding that the light drowns out the darkness. And so when we stand together in a good way, things are going to go down. You know, the women's suffrage movement happened and people lost their lives. You know, people lose their lives over these great movements. There was a book that I read once by Eduardo Duran called Red-Faced Buddha. And he was working with an old medicine man, you know, kind of like the Don Juan story. And this old medicine man was teaching him as he went along. And at one point, this medicine man took him into this cave, and they must have been eating some kind of hallucinogens, although he didn't reveal that in the story. And he went into this space, this dimensional space where there were beings from many different planets and all over the place and from all different time zones. Jesus was there and Gandhi was there. He said the devil himself was there. Mother Teresa was there. You know, all these figures that we might recognize, he said, in half beast-headed figures, and everybody standing around, and they were all contemplating, what are we going to do to balance this Mother Earth, this Earth star here, because this is a co-creation that was brought. This is what his dream is. You know, I'm not trying to preach anything here, but it was this earth is a co-creation of numerous, you know, dimensional beings, so that we can come here and have a physical experience like this. And so what are we going to do to balance it out? Because look at them, they're just going nuts, those people down there. They're just, you know, or up or wherever, however it was he said it, you know, he was saying that they need help. And during these times, and they said, well, that the indigenous people that were still living indigenously close to the earth at that time said, we'll do it. You know, we'll take that burden and we'll walk that path so that we can show what happens when when that destruction comes. And so then we had this huge Holocaust of Native and Indigenous people, you know. So his dream essentially brought him to the understanding that the suffering, you know, while it's happening, may at some level be necessary to assist with balancing the energies of the world. And the best thing we can do is to have compassion, love, and to come in and hold space. I mean, if we can get sucked into these things, and then we lose objectivity in our ability to be of good assistance. And so I don't really know what else to say about that, because I don't know if I'm not going to get called at some point to run over to Mississippi, you know, and stand there on that pipeline, you know, because it's trying to be stopped right now, but it's in a big battle because now we've got a president who's going to try to stop these things, but yet, you know, the money is still going to push back. So racism, all of those things, it breaks my heart that it's there. And if we feel so called to come and hold space, then we can do a good job, hope, you know, in that way. But it's really, we do have to, you know, I mean, I've had racism right up in my face in so many different ways, in so many different parts of my life. It's just been, it's almost comical now. It's almost, for me, a gauge. I can feel the energy coming, and I'm okay with it because now I know where not to go. I know we're not to, you know, where to stay away from, but sometimes we still have to combat it because it enters into our families. So, you know, lots of prayers, and I just stand in solidarity with all of us together as we address these things in the best way that we can.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Mhm.
Many prayers for your work.
Thank you.
And Lisa, I think Joe had a question, but I want to comment on what you just said about, the activism, and connect it kind of back to the mental health challenges that we're talking about and that we see in the world, everywhere, and how being an activist and getting involved, the ways that actually support our mental health. And then there's ways that it doesn't, right? That we get burnout and stuff, or that we're doing it in a way that looks like Amos made a comment here about surrendering to oppressive tactics, which is interesting. So I just thought maybe you could just comment on that, just about how activism and mental health are connected in the ways that are helpful for us.
Well, one reason that that activism makes a list of 7 constructs of what it means to be well, that you are involved in some form of activism, the reason that that makes the list is because we are living in a world that is out of balance. And I would love to be able to just skip down the aisle and not recognize that, because I want to keep a high vibe and I want everything to be all positive. I really want that. I really do. Jewel, you know me. I'm like, yeah, let's just hold hands and skip and pray, and but activism, but because it shows our desire to see the world come into balance at a community level. And that's why it makes the list, because it's important for us to be addressing the issues that have to do with clean water, with clean air, with the land and the standing nations, the ones that fly, the ones that crawl on the earth. And that, all of these dynamics, we see places that come and clear the fields out and get rid of all the bugs. Now we find out, whoa, wait a minute, we need those bugs. Those bugs are important. It's like we find out that it all does work together. And so I don't know, if that answers the question, but being active and speaking up for the things in our community, especially the basic elementals, food and water and air and land and those kinds of things, are critical. And I think when we're not, oftentimes it could mean potentially that if we don't have any awareness of those things, that we maybe there's somebody that's in a position of creating a demand that doesn't recognize that it's taking from others. It's time for us to have a paradigm shift. I know there's lots of people in the world today that are speaking the same thing that I'm speaking. We can't keep doing things the same way that we're doing them. We have to make it different. We cannot continue to eat the same way that we're eating. We must change those ways. We cannot continue to mass produce foods and pack them full of pesticides and process things and expect our bodies to do any better than they're doing when we're consuming these things. We cannot live in the same world, because if we do, we will continue to pass these things down, the stories, the same cycles of the way that we live, the traumas, we continue to pass them down. So becoming active and taking a stand in one way or another, for the community in a good way is important. And taking responsibility for ourselves. And
Lisa, I think what I'm asking is, oh, whoops, sorry, there's a delay in my video, and I apologize. So I thought you had stopped. The question, clarification on that was, how do we take care of ourselves while being an activist? Like, some people can't do too much activism because they're, of whatever health issues or whatever limitations. And so what are ways to do activism in a way that is actually better, like a decolonized way of doing activism?
Well, because
okay,
if you're getting worn out in doing what you're doing, it's possible that you're not paying attention to yourself and the clues in yourself, and so you may have something to learn with respect to overcommitting yourself to things that maybe you're not ready for, or maybe you're not functioning in exactly that highest expression or something, and so it's wearing you down. When we're always seeking balance, so we definitely have to seek balance. And if we're over involved in things, on a physical level that's taxing us that way, that's one thing. I've come to understand that the most important thing I can do for my people, the Washoe people that I love and that I really commit my time and energy towards in our communities, is prayer. And these are, I mean, that's powerful, but how often do I actually get up in the morning and set my blanket out and say, today is going to be a day of prayer? Not as often as, not very often. I'll put those prayers down during ceremony or, when I have a special prayer time, but doing that prayer every day, is really, that's activism. And, I don't want to, I mean, levels of activism, if we're paying attention to ourselves, we're finding that balance. And if we're not finding that balance, then it may be time for us to back off a little bit of what we're doing so that we can find that balance. But we still have our good thoughts and our good feelings and our good energy to put out there.
Yeah.
I don't know
Thank
if
you.
that answered your question.
Thank you. That was really helpful. Yeah, no, I think balance is the answer, and that's really helpful. And everybody has a different level of balance. We've got 4 questions in the wings, so I want to make sure that we get to those. I think the order of Janet, Amos, Janice, and Shakhtari. So go for it, Janet.
Jewel, I had my hand up. I just had this is Joseph. Joe, can you hear me?
Oh, I didn't see you. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and she's already answered it.
Were you there first? Go for it. Okay.
I just
apologies.
I just wanted to piggyback on the sacred on the activism, because the question that I had was around sacred activism. Okay, the concept of sacred activism, which partly she's answering. Okay, but what I wanted to what I thought was important in the work that I'm doing here in Taos, New Mexico. Okay, besides ceremony and prayer and deep dialogue. Okay, talking stick. Is I think that is important in these times. But what I wanted to ask Lisa, who's just incredible, I wanted to ask her, what does sacred activism look like when big groups come together? What does that look like, as opposed to the way it's been? I was just wondering what her thoughts were on that, as a group.
Well, thank you for that question. So cohesiveness, I guess that's the first word that comes to mind, is cohesiveness, that it looks like cohesiveness and even a sense of peace, that we're moving together like that. So I don't know, that's what it looks like to me. I mean, I've had those moments where, I've been at Mauna Kea and we're standing at the bottom of the access road up to the Mauna where these telescopes are going to be constructed, and then one of these elder kapuna, the Hawaiian elders, come out and they start a hula and they start moving, and then everybody's moving, and all those movements are talking about the connection of the earth to the mountains up above and to the down below, and all of those things, and that cycle of life, and that song starts. That is sacred activism to me. I think, I don't know I guess we would all have to participate in defining that one, because I think there's definitely a sense of cohesiveness, a sense of peace, and, and we can get some rest. We can sleep at night,
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. And now we have Janet.
Okay.
And then Amos after her.
Back to your question about how can we take care of ourselves in activism, what are healthy ways? So I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts. I'm quite sensitive, so I have pretty strong boundaries on what I get involved in and what I don't, in order to take care of myself. And now I deal with a brain injury. So the whole time I'm thinking, how can I be a contribution, continue to be a contribution, and make an impact. And so I wrote in the chat, like one thing that I do is I help people develop their emotional intelligence. And why I think that's important is that gives us certain language and certain groundedness to have conversations, curious, harmonious conversation versus being triggered with each other and having to be right. And then the other piece is like our language. If we use affirmative declarative language, I believe that creates more of a sense of expansiveness and connectiveness versus words like resist or resistance or against. So as Lisa has spoken to a few times, like our words are our prayers, right? Is that right? So just when I work with my clients, I have them speak certain words and like really feel into their body. Like, do you feel contracted or do you feel expansive? And we can all do that test on ourselves. And so I think the more expansive feeling is where we can make the change that we want to versus creating resistance. I hope I'm making sense. I'm complete.
Who goes next? Amos?
Yes. Amos.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Two concepts. One, emptiness, and the other, soul wound. Emptiness comes from my work with the Foundation for Community Encouragement decades ago. And Scott Peck and that outfit indicated that genuine community begins with emptiness. And then the other thing that I'm curious to hear Lisa talk about is soul wounds.
Okay, thank you, Amos. So a soul wound, I first heard about soul wounds and it made a lot of sense to me because in Native and Indigenous cultures, we have a lot of challenges with alcohol and food addictions and mental and all kinds of disproportionate mental and physical kinds of dysfunctions in Native American communities. And it was pretty obvious to all of us that these were soul wounds, even though we didn't really have the verbiage to talk about them, because there are things that happen and then we take them out and we all know this, but through drinking or eating or something else. And then we have an entire collective society that's moving around these soul wounds. So how do we address these soul wounds was always the question for Native people that were in these programs in psychology. And, I always found it interesting that we didn't even have a class, to talk about historical and intergenerational trauma, which is one of the courses that we did create. We created a course called Healing Intergenerational and Healing Trauma, including intergenerational and historical, because trauma, it acts on all of us very similar, even though we have different outcomes, it's the same. So the soul wound is something that happens that, at a soul level. Maybe it's a childhood trauma that happened before language development and we can't speak about something. It's always a little bit foggy about what actually really happened. And then sometimes we carry a lot of guilt and we carry a lot of that kind of stuff. So that soul wound is the thing that separates us from our full connection to spirit, to being able to really be free, because we have that wounding in there. And that wounding maybe shows up in our life in the way of our relationships, our intimate relationships, or when we start raising children and then suddenly now we have a child that's our age or that's growing up and we're seeing a reflection of ourselves. And so there's it may be that we are passing on some kind of a soul wound, and those, we can't think our way out of a soul wound. We can do all kinds of things. Now, if we have a practice of mantraing or a practice of something that's intended, or we set up ceremony, we have ceremony, we have an intention to get better about something. You know, alcoholism and negative behavior and violence and all of those things are a result of deep soul wounds. What brings people to these places where they can do these things to other people? It's a soul wound. And so we, you know, and that's where we're all in need of healing. And sometimes, you know, when I say all healing is self-healing, but until the person is really ready, sometimes we get entangled with those soul wounds because we create a codependent kind of feedback loop in our relationships throughout life, because, you know, and then sometimes we don't recognize them. In the Native and Indigenous communities, we recognize things at a spiritual dimension. We recognize spirits, and we recognize when, you know, there's something that is like, something's got a hold of you. You know, it's like you might think that way, something's got a hold of you. So we need to take that thing out, you know, what it is, because it's blocking you from being able to make the progress you need to make. Instead, you keep going back and doing drugs or doing alcohol or hurting somebody, you know, that you got to get a hold of that. And so it's like and so then that's where ceremony comes in, and that's where plant medicines have come in as well too, to help to cure, to heal those soul wounds. And I don't know that I've said enough about that, because soul wounding is a huge topic. There's a book by Eduardo Duran called Healing the Soul Wound. And it's a really good book. He also talks about decolonization and colonization and its role in creating, you know, and disallowing our ability to really release those soul wounds. So yeah, I mean, I would say probably, you know, we're all impacted at some level by a soul wound that has somewhere gotten in the way of our ability to have a good relationship with somebody we care about, somebody we love, or figure something out. There's a little soul wounding in there. We need to, you know, we want to seek our healing for that. So I don't know if that's enough, if I've said enough about that, but it's a lot.
I'll get the book.
Yeah, it is a lot to talk about, you know, curing a soul wound and healing those soul wounds. That's when you work with a medicine person, or you work with a psychologist, right? A doctor, because you have something in there that is not. I like Indigenous medicine because we work a little bit deeper than cognitive behavioral therapy. We get right into that soul and that spirit, and, you know, really try to move that out. But thank you for that question.
Janice.
Hello, Lisa. I've been curious about, well, I went to a talk that Jewel had with this Dine woman, and she was talking about, she got her PhD, as did her father. And one of the things she said that was very intriguing to me, which I just thought I'd ask you about, is that Western oriented, you know, like, I guess Europeans, white Europeans or whatever, tend to be really rational and mental. And she said that after they got their PhDs, they went back and people started in the tribal situation. They started talking about themselves as though they were white Europeans. And I'm just wondering how much that difference between, because I know, you know, from reading and from doing my own practice, which is based on dreams and visions, that is a kind of language that a lot of white Europeans do not speak. They speak more in rational terms. And I want to know if you have some thoughts on how difficult it has been to talk cross-culturally when we're experiencing things in basically some uniquely different ways, in that way, with dreams and visions and the rational piece.
Yeah, that's a good question, and, you know, and a big topic. I'm going to just recommend one book only because it's really interesting, but I'll try to talk when I can. But there's this book called by his name is Fixico. I can't remember his first name, something Fixico, Fixco, and it's called The Native American Mind in a Linear World. And I would assume that what this PhD was talking about in her education and saying everything is so linear and so mental, is that I'm thinking that she probably meant it lacks our ability to recognize the intuitive knowingness of how we experience the world. And so, and which is very much an Indigenous construct. It's kind of like my student was doing her counseling practice, and she was working with a client. And then we were watching the video on this client, and her supervisor was telling me, see, she's not very good because look what's happening to the client right here. And I'm looking at this and she's nervous, clearly nervous. And I'm like, yeah, because she's trying to perform a certain theory. And I asked her, I said, you're nervous when you were talking to your client. What was going on here? And she said, I could see that he had a soul wound that was deep in his stomach and that there was something going on there. And, as a Native Indigenous healer, she would have been like, it would have been a whole different kind of thing, like, let's break this up so we can really have a talk. You can't really have a conversation when somebody's really hurting. And she could see that this guy couldn't get past this. But she had no way to express that in that counseling session, because the way that she understands the world is very intuitive, and she had no language and she had no framework, and she was being evaluated by a Western system. So it's like she really had to struggle through that. But I could clearly see that there was something going on at an energetic level that knocked her off balance, and her ability to even be able to address this man. And so it did make her nervous. But yeah, so there's left brain, right brain. There's all different ways of trying to understand linear, circular, all these different kinds of constructs. When I say Western paradigm, and I looked at, once my students and I came up with a list on two sides of the list. And one side was Indigenous ways of knowing paradigm, and the other side was a Western. And so from an Indigenous paradigm, we look at the earth as being alive. The earth is our mother, taking care of us. And from a Western paradigm, the earth is a commodity to be used, at whatever the humans' whims they want. And from an Indigenous paradigm, the body or the emotions are something that can guide you and can help give you and gives you a lot of good information. But from a Western paradigm, you need to keep those emotions in check because they might be out of line. Let's be rational here. And rationality is a definable construct, that has a very European kind of definition, so it's like, so so we did this whole list on what it actually means, one or the other, our view of spirit, our view of life, our view of all these things, like what's the difference? And essentially, I think we all operate on every level of that. It's not a linear, it's not a this or that. I think we all operate somewhere in there. Some of us were raised up with some very linear ideas about how to do things. And guess what? Those people are very successful in life. So some of us who are kind of willy-nilly could learn something in that way, So I think a lot of it is that we have, but we miss a lot of important information when we disallow the intuitive sense of knowing to be a part of our professional knowledge or knowledge making. I don't know if that makes sense.
That was great, Lisa. We've got a couple more questions, and we're coming to the end of our time. So we're gonna
I'll be quick.
Try to move it along here with the next couple. Hari, and then after that we've got Joanna, I think.
Okay, I'll be very quick. Just branching off of what you just said, I've been an artist my whole life, among other things, and I realized very early that what I needed to focus on is not teaching people technique, but teaching people how to use their senses, that we don't use them at all. And we don't even do the science behind them to figure out how these bodies work, because there's no money in it. So I just want to throw that out, as that we're walking in a place where when you think you only have 5 senses, those are truly the only ones you use. But that doesn't mean there aren't more. Yeah. The second thing I wanted to say is that when you were giving an example of saying your morning prayer, it reminded me of something that really ties in for me with the rationality of the science, because I also love science. And that is that, when I go to bed at night, this house is made of wood. These are trees. And I spend time thanking every molecule in this house
Awesome.
for its support, and thanking all of the animals and life cycles that created these trees, and the pollinators and everything involved. And I do the same thing with my food before I eat, because what I'm truly eating is sunlight. If you really trace it back scientifically, everything we eat is sunlight. It's either ate sunlight through plants, or it is a plant, right? So I just wanted to throw those two ideas out, and thank you. This has been very rich.
Awesome. Thank you. That's lovely. Yes. Yep. Thank you.
And we've got, I hope I said your name right, Johanna?
Thanks, Jewel. It's Johanna. Thank you for this space. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Jewel. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Life. This is so rich. I have so much to chew on, sit with. I have a kind of a specific question, if you're up for it, Lisa. I'm curious, as a practitioner, if you'd be willing to give us a picture of like boundaries and ethics from the Western medicine perspective about how you work with your client, how you interact with them, what you're allowed to do, and so on. I'm wondering if you could give me your perspective on that, or contrast a bit.
Well, I definitely dealt with a huge contrast at the university level, trying to teach my students how to work with clients from an Indigenous perspective. Because so depending on your setting, now I don't have to worry about any of that. When people ask me for help, they don't know what they're going to get, and they're usually okay with that, but when you come into a structured kind of clinic and stuff, there's all kinds of ethics and rules and crossovers. So we created a Indigenous counseling like permission form and checkoff list to introduce people to what Indigenous counseling may look like. And each person who is an Indigenous practitioner, we had them write up the kinds of things that they do as an Indigenous practitioner, so that they could give consent for that. So we did that, to appease a lot of the Western paradigm, because we do use prayers and feathers and rattles and, and sage and different things. We don't want the smoke alarms to go off. We've had all of those experiences that have happened. And we also are not looking to, try to have anybody co-opt anybody's ways. There've been a lot of situations where people that really didn't practice the ways all of a sudden found the value and then adopted them for their own and began to bring them into a clinic kind of thing. And so it's like, like burning sage or those kinds of things. It is important that we sit with all of this stuff ourselves, and that we bring this out as authentically as we can. But I think for the structure, trying to, where do I cross over? We may have to create something that allows for that informed consent to occur for Indigenous practices. But, gosh, I don't even know if I'm answering your question right, or giving you any information at all. I know that we had to create something at the university level. And now, in the way that I work now, I don't have to worry about any of that at this point. But
thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's a huge topic, just like all of these. My world just keeps expanding in these spaces. So very grateful for your share on that. And I will pass.
Well, we've got about 6 minutes till we're our prescribed ending time. Though, we might go a couple minutes over if we need to. But Lisa, maybe just let's just close it up here, and just whatever final thoughts you have around this. I know there's so much more that you can say, and I'm already thinking about your next talk coming back. So because there's so much that so many threads we could follow up on. But out of all the threads that you spoke to, I don't know if you want to speak to anything that's really present for you right now as we close up.
The thing that is the most present for me right now, and I feel like I'm doing all right. I don't feel like I have any major stuff going on. We all have our things that we're addressing, but I feel like for me, it is so important for me to recognize anything that might be stepping in my way of stepping into my highest expression, and to engaging, my time in a way that allows me to really make the changes that I need to make for myself. And I feel like, if there was one message that I want to leave people with, it's the idea that, who you are as an individual, as somebody different than me, who you are is so important. It's so critical that we can recognize ourselves and recognize our own impact when we're having a relationship one-on-one, or even a relationship one-on 22, however it's happening, but that it's so important that we recognize the importance of our words, the importance of our thoughts, and recognize that we ourselves are a part of something really beautiful and a lot bigger than ourselves, and I think that, that's a lot of what Jewel and I connected on. I remember when Jewel stepped into the teepee at Standing Rock, and I was giving all of these at noon every day. It was like an orientation for the new set of people that were coming in to volunteer, and Jewel came in and she's volunteering, and she introduces herself and she says clergy, and I'm like, I'm a Native woman at Standing Rock going, clergy, huh? And Jewel's just like right there, and then we started working together, and I just became so humble. And it wasn't that I had anything against anything, but we're at a Native American movement, and there's some heavy, and to have somebody show up, representing what would be a Western construct of religion, but, in the form of Jewel. And I really think we just kind of I fell in love with Jewel. Her heart was so right on and so pure, and it humbled me. And, it doesn't matter what walk of life we come from, we can be ourselves. We can pray however we want to pray. But when we come together as a genuine human being, that's what broke it down for me and Jewel. She's her and I'm me. And we looked at each other and we allowed, because we both had something bigger than ourselves that we believed in, that we were there to serve together for. And so I was able to put anything that I might have aside, and I never saw anything from Jewel because she only came to serve. That's it. She just came to serve. And so I, in a lot of ways, as a Native person, as a Native woman, I never really stepped into an environment where I walk in and everybody's like, oh, you're a Native woman, you must be in charge. And everybody's asking me questions like I got privilege or something, or like I know something. And I'm not Lakota, I'm Washoe. I'm Native, but I'm not Lakota. But I come into this environment, and all of a sudden I'm the mama of everybody, I'm the knowledge giver of everybody. And I'm like, wow, how did this happen so fast? Jewel didn't get that privilege. A lot of people didn't get that. And I had never, I know that that's a privilege that maybe you get, when you're a distinguished, nice looking white male and you walk into a space and you get, this kind of thing. But all of a sudden I was getting this. So I also had to take a look at my ego, which was really beautiful to get to do. And I found out some things that I love about myself, in addition to some things that I had to recognize to get over myself about. I recognized that I'm present for the world, and that I can grow, I can get over myself, I can become a part of all of you, and we can open up, we can hold space for each other, and we can stand in balance in ourselves and know that we're being a part of something much larger than ourselves. So really, that's the biggest thing I would love to leave people with, is the importance of your own ceremony, and your own recognition of your place in this whole collective, that we're all important, that you're important, that you're, every part of your life and my life. And when we come together like this, like that, it really does bring balance in the world. It's like a prayer ceremony, because, we're talking, we're opening a dialogue. And, I also like to say, give thanks to the earth for our physical life existence, that we'd love to leave that message. The earth is, now at the la dila iri, washishu tetehuya estotalia, miango amibi. It's so good that we're all here together. So I just want to say that much. Meet lao dielo, all my relations. I hope.
Yeah, beautiful, Lisa. You You did what before I even asked. I was going to say, can you help close with a prayer? You know, because I know you and I love to come together and just speak our prayers, just like you said. What we speak is our prayer, and so with that in mind and that intention, I speak over everybody here that has come to listen to your beautiful sharing and wisdom, and so rich, and there's so many pieces to it to percolate on. But I just want to speak a prayer over everybody here, that everyone here just feel lifted up in their lives, and feel the grace and the blessing of what it really means to be here together, you know, to be here together on the earth, to feel the earth, to feel each other, even though we're in all these distant spaces by physical distance, but we're together in spirit, you know. And I just really want to just everyone here to feel blessed and connected to that spirit that we're all part of right now, and that Lisa has shared so generously. Thank you, Lisa. Your spirit just continues to inspire me and humble me too. So thank you so much for your presence. And I really hope that you'll come back and let's talk about that, because I know there's lots more.
Jewel?
So thank you, everybody. And thank you.
Jewel, before
Yeah.
you stop.
Yes, you wanted to say something? Sorry.
Well, Lisa, you mentioned a book, and Ellen wrote it in the chat, but I didn't think anyone saw it. So I just wanted to bring that up. You were writing a book?
I have a book. It's called Indigenous Ways of Knowing in Counseling, Theory, Research, and Practice. So it's very academic. I'm really upset with my publisher because while they have it on the market right now and they're making money with it, they've never sent me my copies. So, you know, I'm not opposed to sending the PDF to people if they want it. So if you get it to Jewel, I'll get a copy to Jewel, and then I'll let Jewel give a copy. Just promise not to hand it out, because, you know, I'm probably breaking a copyright law, but I'm kind of upset with my publisher, so that's what they get. So I'd be happy to share the PDF with you.
I'll
Lisa.
be happy to share it once I get it.
Lisa, I just want to say
And
thank
we'll
you for
have a copy
demonstrating
of this
sacred
video.
activism.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lisa, and any other resources or books that I am happy to send out in an email list. I think everybody here is on the email list. If you're not, you should be. So
Thanks, Jules.
yeah,
Shanti,
we
Lisa.
can all unmute ourselves and unmute everybody. Virtual audio hugs.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
For being here.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much,
Thanks for
love.
being
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Good
Bye.
night.
I think we don't want to leave. I didn't get the title. She's another exquisite jewel. Jewel, that fits your name. You're finding all these jewels, these people.
Huh?
Oh,
I need to head out, but sending so much love.
Oh, Shanti, bye. Bye-bye. Thanks for coming.